Good evening, everyone. It gives me great pleasure to introduce Mr. Kotak, Mr. Narendran, Mr. Singh. Thank you all. Mr. Kotak, while we are talking about the decade forward, I will take our conversation to the last IEC, where you had said that India needs banks, but it needs few PSU banks. It needs adaptation of fintech, and it needs consolidation in the sector. I guess you knew what was happening, or you were able to understand the pulse, because that indeed is happening 1 year after our interaction.
Thank you, Nikunj, and delighted to be here. I do believe that India has made very serious progress in this pandemic era and actually grasped the opportunity of what we need to do. Therefore, the financial sector is in for significant change. The government's move of testing out with 2 public sector banks is first of its kind. And I think this, combined with the fact that over time you will have 4 or 5 large state-owned banks and private sector banks, and at the same time opening up to competition in the sector, is the right way to go. At the same time, we need to be clear that in last 1 year, COVID has changed our lives in the field of technology and financial services by a multiplier of 5. What would have otherwise taken us 5 years is happening in 1 year. And that's what we have got to be ready for.
Just a follow-up question, Mr. Kotak. During the course of 2020, every time we interacted with you on various forums, your words were, India Inc. has been hit. It's like a ship which is now trapped in muddy waters. But is that challenging time behind us? Do you think the ship has reached the shore?
I think, Nikunj, what has happened is COVID has actually created a new category of what I call as haves and have-nots. The people who have had access to capital are in the category of haves, and that is primarily the organized sector or companies which have access to public markets, as also private equity. And the have-nots are the ones who did not have access to capital. And this very stark difference between the haves and the have-nots based on access to capital is pretty startling in many ways. Therefore, even if you are from a stressed sector, if you have access to capital, you are in good shape. And if you don't have access to capital, you are in a tougher position. And that is the difference which we have seen happen in front of us. And I think that is as a result of dramatic pouring of money and liquidity globally and in India as well. And that has enabled equity capital to rescue most of the organized sector.
Mr. Narendran, the manufacturing sector for the longest time has raised concerns about 3 things: cost of land, cost of labor, and the entire ease of doing business. Can I say the COVID crisis in a sense has rebooted everything? Because now manufacturing is getting a serious push from the administration. One is getting a sense that the cost of the land issues and also the cost of capital is now getting very, very efficient. I think you're on mute.
A lot is being done by the government to encourage manufacturing in India. Obviously, this is something we need to get the manufacturing percentage up from 15 to 25%, but it's not going to come easily. So I think there are costs within the factory gates which the manufacturing companies should take care of. And I think many manufacturing companies in India are world class as far as competitiveness within the factory gate is concerned. There are costs outside the factory gate where the government can play a role, and which is what you've referred to. So a number of actions have been taken on the ease of doing business as well as the cost of doing business. I think the third most important thing which has happened, while it's a bit controversial, is to encourage people to come and make in India for India. While we need to be part of global supply chains, we also need to create an opportunity to for manufacturing to build scale, leverage the market opportunity that there is in India, and hence build competitiveness for them to compete globally and to be part of global supply chains. Because India is an important part of the global supply chain as a destination, not just as a source.
Mr. Singh, the theme of the conference is reform, perform, and transform. reforms have happened. A little bit of optimism on the performance has come because if I look at earnings and the demand indicators, they are quite favorable. Let's focus on the transform part. Looking at the lay of the land, what kind of transformation do you think India Inc. will be able to incorporate? One side are compulsions and second side is efficiency.
Look, I can just give you the example of our sector, which has been one of the most stressed sectors in this time of pandemic. Aviation, travel, tourism, it's been very difficult not only for Indian companies, but for global companies. But in this period, one of the things that airlines have been forced to do is to actually try and transform themselves as companies way beyond aviation. In SpiceJet's case, we've built an air logistics business in this last 1 year, which has grown by some 600%. It's creating tremendous value. It's growing at some 200-300%, every year. Absolutely incredible. This would never have happened if COVID had not hit. So this is one of the great benefits of a crisis, that we have to try and transform ourselves from what we were doing. Similarly, we are working on healthcare now, and we think that those are opportunities we would never have taken up. So I think in a situation like what we saw in the last 1 year, companies that have been capitalized, as Mr. Kotak was saying, and companies that have tried to reinvent themselves are the ones that probably have survived. And the way we look at it, it is that this COVID crisis will probably last us a year or 2 years. But sometimes the changes that you make during this period, in terms of efficiency that you're talking about, in terms of cost cutting, in terms of much more automation, in terms of finding new opportunities, those benefits are going to stay with you for decades. So perhaps this 2 years is well worth the pain, so that we have much more gain in the longer term.
Mr. Kotak, we are getting a sense from just about everyone in the industry, and the ring is demand at an all-time high, visibility at an all-time high, margins at an all-time high. While we are liking the ring of what we are hearing from corporate India, today at IEC, is my voice reaching you, Mr. Kotak?
We can't hear.
Mr. Kotak, if one analyzes the kind of indications which we are getting from India Inc., I'll try with Mr. Narendran. Mr. Narendran, is my voice reaching you?
I can now hear you.
Okay, wonderful. So I'll go back to Mr. Kotak again. Mr. Kotak, if I look at the broad tone of commentary from India Inc., it is the following. Margins, highest ever. Demand visibility, strongest. In terms of optimism, it is also high. My question to you, Mr. Kotak, is exactly a year ago, when there was fear, gloom and doom on the street, what has transpired? And how does one differentiate the kind of indications which we're getting from India Inc.? Are they permanent, or are they just, spurts of demand, more like sugar rush?
Nikunj, 1 year ago, we did not know what hit us. We had no idea of the contours of the COVID impact. What is the virus doing? What is the level of mortality? What is the speed at which it is going to spread? And how bad it is going to be? Today, 1 year later, we seem to be understanding the virus a little better, though it continues to mutate. That's one. At the same time, there is greater optimism on the possibility of vaccination of a lot of our people, though I think it's going to take a few months more for us to be getting to a more comfortable place. At the same time, I think the issue is we have started being able to deal with this virus in terms of our lives, what we can do, what we cannot do. We have adapted our life to the new reality. So all these are the pluses. And that is one of the reasons why I think business and industry feels it's in a better place than what it was 1 year ago. Having said that, I just wanted to say on this channel that these are good things, better handle on the virus and vaccination moving forward. But we have to be careful of a mindset of complacency. And the virus is not gone. 1 year later, it's still around. We feel more comfortable with it, but the virus is mutating. And therefore, I will be certainly looking with optimism because we are seeing a changed world, but keep my guard up. I would not lower my guard too soon and make this more a marathon rather than a sprint.
I'm going to pick it up from where Mr. Kotak left, Mr. Narendran, which is that it's time to be cautious. But frankly, if I look at the steel sector, the sector which you represent, it's never been so good before. Prices at a record high, demand at an all-time high, inventory at an all-time low. And the question which in a sense is puzzling everyone is this beginning of a new cycle, or this is just pent-up demand which perhaps has extended itself for 2 quarters?
So, Nikunj, what's happening in the steel industry is more to do with what's happening in China. I think the recovery in China has been much faster, sharper than any of us thought. And that, in fact, helped the Indian steel industry. If you really look at the second quarter of last financial year, when we were really coming out of this crisis, because all of us exported a lot of steel to China and kept the production running. So the recovery in China's incrementally consumed more steel in 2020 than India produced. There was 80 million tons more steel consumption in China last year, incremental consumption. So that's the extent of recovery in China, and that's what has impacted everything. Secondly, while in India the demand has picked up, we are still consuming less steel than we did last year. So it's not that the demand in India has really come back to where it was. It's because of the export markets that the Indian steel companies have been able to export their way out of trouble. But in the last 2 quarters, we've seen the Indian demand pick up. We hope that next year the steel demand will grow at least 10-12% to catch up to where we were in 2019. Globally, I think China's recovery is going to keep commodity prices quite high.
Mr. Singh, do you think we have all the necessary ingredients in place, given at the pace of reforms, interest rates, how cost-cutting and collaboration has been something which is the highlight of this entire COVID crisis? Do you think we have all the necessary ingredients that this decade belongs to India? Because every 10 years, sir, the puck changes. Last 10 years was dominated by US. Before that, it was China. Then it was Japan before that.
Look, I think we are in an interesting place. I think we've used the crisis pretty well. I think this year's budget, for the first time, I think clearly said that the government had no business to be in business, and they needed to get out of all public sector units. For the first time, we saw this change in mindset, which said that, look, irrespective of whether a public sector unit makes profit or doesn't make profit, they're going to sell it anyway because they shouldn't be in that business. This is a fundamental change, I think. And the fact that they said, okay, we are going to use this money now and try and build hard assets, capital assets, I think great. But, as in everything in India, it's going to be about the execution. The plan is great. I think the way they use the crisis is great, but how are you going to execute? I mean, in terms of stuff like public sector sales, it's easier said than done. We all know that. I think one of the things that we really need to look at is all these guys who are in the disinvestment ministry, all the officers who are involved in this process, can we give them some form of amnesty? Because otherwise, if you try and sell all these assets, these banks and these airport authority and all these assets that they are attempting to sell, wonderful idea, do it. But for God's sake, speed up the process and give amnesty. Because if everything is going to be questioned 10 years later, and if agencies are going to come after these officers, then nothing ever gets done. So let's look at fundamentally changing the rules of engagement here and moving fast and executing well. Let's just focus on that. And I think we have a brilliant decade ahead of us if we execute well.
So I'm not trying to get a headline from you, but the sector you represent, Air India, is up for disinvestment. When we spoke to the disinvestment secretary earlier in the day, he said, look, government is ready to divest strategically and financially. The private sector is not ready to participate. You need 2 hands to clap. Would you like to react to it?
Look, we know that Air India is a very, very difficult sort of a company to try and put back into shape. But it's a task worth doing. I think the reason that the government failed with that disinvestment the first 2 times was because the structure was just completely inappropriate. Government was asking potential buyers to take significant amount of debt, $5 billion, $6 billion of debt, when you could have created the same airline for a fraction of that money. This time, at least in terms of a deal, they've tried to do it the right way. And we really hope that they can finally sell this asset. By selling this asset, they will, in a large way, try and bring about a level playing field in the aviation sector. Because Air India being Air India is really distorting the market at this point of time. I really hope that the private sector can participate. As you know, some people have bid for the asset, and that process is on. And I hope that this will be a successful, because it's not about the size of the disinvestment and what the government might get. Firstly, remember that in this case, government is bleeding every day on that company. So just by disinvesting it, even if they do it for zero, they'll be saving 10,000 crores a year. So that in itself is worth it. The fact that there will be a level playing field in the sector is worth it. And it will be a huge, high-profile disinvestment, great for the entire disinvestment program.
Mr. Kotak, final question to you. Last decade, or the decade gone by, was dominated by companies which in a sense were very conscious about not raising debt, companies which in a sense were built on asset-light models, and companies which were not very leveraged. That is what stock markets, that is what got a thumbs up from stock markets. This decade, do you think the reverse could happen?
No, I think investment cycle in India has to take off. In many ways, I look at 2021 economy of India similar to 2003 India from an economic point of view. On the market side, I think you're more like 2007 versus 2003. But on the economy side, you're more at 2003 when you saw a very positive investment cycle. And that remained for the next 5 years. And I go back to the historic comparison of post the Spanish flu. You saw the roaring 20s in the world. So maybe we are in for something which can be different this time around. And I would really like to see the investment cycle in India take its full steam forward. Historically, India has been too dependent on consumption GDP. I think time has come for really getting a solid, sustainable booster dose, which is now a very popular term in the vaccine world, to really get a booster dose for our economy on a sustained basis on the investment side, combined with automatics, that supply side driving the consumption pickup. And therefore, yes, more debt, yes. But what I worry about is excessive exuberance. Indians tend at times to get to be excessively exuberant. If we can keep our heads steady and think about sustainable growth and over time, rather than quick steroids, I think we will be in a much better place.
Final question to you, Mr. Narendran. Do you see a fresh investment cycle picking up in India? We've been waiting for this for many years. Do you see more than probability, there is a strong possibility that the cycle is about to pick up and we are staring at a new credit cycle and a new consumption cycle, investment cycle?
I think so. The conditions are right. As Uday said, traditionally we've been consumption-led growth. Now the government has given a lot of importance to infrastructure. A lot of money is going into infrastructure, which is good for demand. So there is demand which is coming in. Second part is investment. Private sector investment will happen if there is demand and companies are profitable. It's not just about demand, but it should be profitable demand in some sense. And I think the measures on the cost of doing business, the measures on the ease of doing business, and also the efficiency that industries brought into themselves will drive better profitability, and supported by good demand makes a good case for a new investment cycle.
Well, I'll not extend our appointment with all of you. It's late in the evening. So Mr. Kotak, Mr. Narendran, Mr. Singh, thank you all for joining us. And the really key takeaway from this CI panel is that things and the setting of the table is just right for India really to take that giant leap forward. And looks like finally that time and moment has arrived in terms of a stock market cycle and also an investment cycle. With that, I'll hand it back to Abha.
Thank you, gentlemen, and thank you, Nikunj.